It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
I can't do the whole thing, but I'll try. Rico Brogna! Welcome to episode number 423 of Rico Brogna. We are sitting here in the first week of February. This is a time of year in which I'm usually so excited because we're a week away from spring training. We can preview the rosters. We can kind of break down how do you compare this team to last year. And I feel as if to do a proper Rico Brogna season preview or spring training preview or, hey, this is how I would have the lineup versus how you would have the lineup. I feel like we can't do it until we get closure on Pete Alonso. And what sucks about this is that it is February 4th. And I don't know if Pete Alonso is going to come back. I really don't. I mean, I'm guessing as much as anybody. There doesn't seem to be a market for him. We've discussed this on many editions. The Mets are still kind of leaving a spot open for him. You know, they haven't replaced him in terms of going out and getting a right-handed bat to play first base. And so as we sit here in what is such usually an exciting time, a week before spring training, that is my jam as a baseball geek. I feel like it's still the middle of the offseason. Now, I know we as Met fans dealt with the signing of J.D. Martinez, and that occurred pretty much right before the season. But the reason why that was so different is I think we went into spring training just assuming they're not going to sign a DH. You know, we yelled for it. I certainly did a lot of podcasts arguing for it. But once spring training came around, I think we just all accepted, well, they're not adding a DH. And if they do, added bonus. I don't know if we can do that around Pete Alonso because as we get closer to spring training and we get closer to really analyzing the roster and breaking down the lineups and how I'd line it up versus how you'd line it up, I do think the Mets are going to make not a big move, but a move to replace Pete if Pete doesn't come back. And I think that move is more along the lines of, and we've talked about a few of these names, but specifically a guy like Spencer Torkelson or Ryan Mountcastle. And I'm not saying that's completely minor, but it's not Alex Bregman. They're not making some kind of big move. Obviously, Jurickson Profar's off as he signed with Atlanta. So I do think either Pete comes back and great. I'd be excited about that. I think most Met fans would be excited about it. Or they are making a move to add a right-handed hitting option at first base. So the longer this goes, the longer nothing happens, the longer it still has a chance to occur. And we're kind of in this wait-and-see mode. The moment they go get Spencer Torkelson or they go get Ryan Mountcastle or maybe somebody else we're not even talking about is the moment, even before Pete signs elsewhere, where they're telling you, all right, it's over. And then obviously if Pete signs elsewhere, we know it's over. So I don't know about you guys. I'm pumped for spring training, but it feels empty because we really don't know a very important answer to a very important question, and that is around first base and around Pete Alonso. Now, this pod today will not all be about Pete Alonso. We are going to open up the Rico Brogna mailbag. We always appreciate your interaction at thericob@gmail.com, and we're going to read a lot of your emails. Some will relate to Pete, some won't. For those that are watching on YouTube, I do want to warn you about something. You may notice if you're watching, if you're consuming as a podcast, this means nothing to you, and I'll only spend 20 seconds on it, but I am arching my head to my right a lot, and that is because we are recording this live during the conclusion of a very important Brooklyn Nets-Houston Rockets game. So instead of pushing off the Rico until later in the night, we're doing the Rico, but I'm seeing what's going on. Now, I'm not going to talk about the game. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to react to the game. But you will if you're watching on YouTube. For those of you that are, you may notice that my head will bob a lot. So I just wanted to let you know why. I'm not watching porn. I'm not doing anything crazy. I'm just watching a garbage basketball team attempt to tank poorly. That's what I'm doing. All right. Now that we got that out of the way, let's check the emails. Of course, again, the email address, you could always contact us, thericob@gmail.com, thericob@gmail.com. Let's start off with Matt. Matt writes, hi, guys. This is a thought I had all of last year as Jose Iglesias was a hitting machine. I also have this same thought as the Mets are considering signing him this offseason. But what if the Mets have to cut him at some point? As you mentioned, I don't expect him to continue to hit at the pace he did in 2024. So if he does cool down, people are going to start asking for the kids to come up from the minor leagues. What will it do to the vibe of the team if they're forced to cut him, considering how well he is liked in the clubhouse? Could this be a reason they have not signed him yet? I don't think it's necessarily a concern about cutting him, a concern about disrupting the locker room. I really think with Jose Iglesias, there's a couple of factors here we have to consider. Number one, if you are Jose Iglesias, a guy who came very close to retiring last year, and you're coming off of what was a great year, and forget about the singing and the performing. He had a great year. Guy had 337. It kind of reminded me, not to go that far back in a time machine, but the Mariano Duncan year of 1996 for the Yankees. You have a guy who's bounced around the league, and all of a sudden, he's hitting well above his weight, well above what he normally does. He had a great year. And so Jose Iglesias is now in free agency, and he's expecting, I assume, especially with Scott Boras as his agent, he's expecting to be paid that way. He's expecting maybe a multi-year deal. And to your point, Matt, he signed a minor league deal 1 year ago. And you can understand why. I mean, Jose Iglesias was bouncing around the league. We mentioned he was considering retiring. So he had to sign a minor league deal. When you sign a guy to a minor league deal, you saw what the Mets were able to do last year. He was at spring training. He didn't make the team. He wasn't called up till late May. They had a lot of flexibility when it came to Jose Iglesias. He is clearly not interested in a contract like that. And I don't blame him. Like, if I'm Jose Iglesias, I'm saying, you kidding me? A minor league contract? They had 337 last year. So I don't think it's as much a concern about cutting him and what it would do to the locker room. I think it's more he's probably asking for more than what the Mets are willing to give. And we talked about this 2 Ricos ago. We did a Rico over the weekend. We also had our rewatch. Hopefully you enjoyed the Rico rewatch. That the Mets have a lot of young middle infield options. Luis Angel Acuna is certainly one of them. So I think that's probably playing a big role in this. I also should mention, I should point out, if I'm just going to just passingly say he's represented by Scott Boras, we should probably at some point dive deeper into, is Scott Boras doing something in this negotiation where maybe he doesn't want the Mets to pay Jose Iglesias too much money because that could hurt his other client, Pete Alonso? Here's the worry. It's funny. I went without an agent for a very long time, and that was a bad decision, man. I was getting killed in negotiations. When I finally decided to hire an agent, and I had a process, and trust me, this is going to make sense. I'm not a major leaguer, but this is going to make sense. One of the things I was talking to my wife about is I said, I don't know if I really want an agent that represents a lot of radio guys, because then he may not put my interest first. He may say, well, I've got like 57 radio guys. I'll put this guy over here, this girl over here, this guy over there, this person, So I hired somebody who I love who doesn't have that many radio guys. Now think about Scott Boras and think about it if you're a baseball player. Do you really want an agent that represents so many people that keeping you from a certain team may help his other client? Think about that. I'm just using logic. I'm not telling you any of this is happening with Scott Boras. I don't know. I'm just using logic. If Scott Boras represents basically half of baseball, I know I'm over exaggerating. Don't you think he may manipulate clients going here or not going there based on what his other client needs? So that's a danger. You're Jose Iglesias who switched to Scott Boras. I think he did that last year. You got to know the risk that you're running into, and certainly the risk that Pete Alonso is running into. More on that a little bit later on this pod. Let's go to Jeff. Jeff writes, Evan and Pete, in listening to your most recent broadcast, the question about the importance of team chemistry came up. And Evan, you're right. Chemistry is an intangible that is impossible to measure. Let me say this in regards to team chemistry. In 2022 Buck Showalter season, we won 102 games. The following season, 2023, we essentially ran it back with the same team. Even though the 2023 team was as talented as the year before, there was something missing that entire year. The team was flat and boring, and it ultimately showed up with an underwhelming season. The 2023 team felt lifeless. Last season, the team was clearly very frustrating in the first half, but fun as hell to watch in the second half and throughout the playoffs, of course. The addition of Winker, Iglesias, and Acuna were the spark of the spark that ignited our team. I don't know if OMG needs to happen again, but creation of a talented roster with a mix of promising youth, veterans, and a fun clubhouse, in my opinion, goes a long way towards successful seasons. So here's how I'm going to counter that, Jeff. And trust me, the more time goes by, the more I'm really feeling almost emotional thinking about 2024. It was an incredibly special year. For a year that they didn't win the World Series, for a year that they didn't get to the World Series, that year, even though they didn't get to those two things, was freaking awesome. And I think as time moves by, I'm actually having a greater appreciation for it. I saw the trailer for the Mets yearbook for 2024, and just seeing it, especially at the beginning with the empty stadium and Gary Cohen's famous line now of empty stadium, 0-5, is this rock bottom? Can it get any worse than this? Whatever he said. And then to flash forward to all the fun that we had come June, July, August, September, and of course, October. Last year was an incredibly special year. And Jose Iglesias and OMG was absolutely a big part of it. With that said, I can sit here, and I did this last year when we tried to figure out what went wrong in 2023. And of course, it had to be team chemistry. It had to be a locker room that has problems. It had to be a core that needs to be broken up. Yeah, that went very well because the following year, the core was the goddamn same thing. And all of a sudden, everybody loves each other. There are baseball reasons that I can give you right now for why they stunk in 2023. The main one, by the way, the main reason why 2023 wasn't as good as 2022, how about the pitching? How about the fact that they didn't pitch nearly as good as they did a year earlier? How about that? Start right there. All those fill-ins, those extra starters that stepped up and pitched well when DeGrom missed the first half of the year and Scherzer had his oblique, those guys weren't pitching nearly as well in 2023. So there's a baseball reason, just one. As far as what happened last year, in the first half of the year, Francisco Lindor was a disaster. In the second half of the year, he put together his best stretch we've seen as a New York Met. He was MVP-like. So again, there are reasons. Edwin Diaz lost his closer's job earlier in the season. And yes, Jose Iglesias, along with OMG, comes up and he hits 357. So I think chemistry, I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all. I'm not saying that. But there were baseball reasons for why 23 was worse than 22. And there were certainly baseball reasons on why the Mets turned their season around. I don't want to completely dismiss chemistry, but I think a lot of times when we see a team have success or a team have failures, Nets are pissing me off. There are reasons more than just this chemistry that we talk about. I mean, think about 2023. And I talked about this a lot. I'm not sure how many people were consuming the Rico, especially as the season was coming to its conclusion. But Hoff will tell you, it bothered me that it felt like every other week there needed to be a diagnosis in terms of the locker room for why the team didn't have success. And it drove me nuts because I'd sit here, Pete and I we watch every game. And I know, as we were sitting there in August and September, maybe not everyone else was watching all those games. And maybe not everyone wanted to hang out and talk with us during that part of the season. A little different than the following year. And I would sit here and say, Pete, here's why we sucked. And there was a list of baseball reasons. And Pete would say, this is why we sucked. And there was another list of baseball reasons. And yet every other day, there needed to be a feature about the locker room. Well, Verlander was a diva and Scherzer didn't like him, or the locker room didn't love each other. Well, they sucked. So I don't think anyone loved each other as they were struggling. I wish there was an analytic or a stat that could tell us the value of chemistry, but I tend to find it a little overrated. Dan Hubbard writes, hey, Evan, first time, long time. Love the pod. Been listening since the early days of you and Joe B on the Fan. Keep up the great work. That is very much appreciated. I wanted to reach out because I keep hearing everyone say, in Stearns we trust when it comes to this offseason, specifically when it comes to how the Pete situation is occurring. It comes across as a tenor of, I don't understand it, but I trust Stearns to put the best product on the field. Am I the only one who thinks the entire first base situation was fumbled completely? If they were only going to offer Pete 3 for 68, they 100% knew he wasn't going to take that. Why not be in on one of the other first basemen that were available this offseason? Christian Walker, Cody Bellinger, Josh Naylor, Paul Goldschmidt, etc. Instead, they did nothing. Watched all of the available first basemen find new homes and are now stuck with either a pissed-off Pete Alonso or Brett Baty. There's no defending how this went down in my mind. Thanks again. Love you and Hoff. Appreciate it, that Dan. So let's attack this because I've heard a lot of Met fans say that, which is, hey, if you didn't want Pete Alonso back, if you weren't going to be aggressive in bringing him back, why not kind of get aboard the carousel of first basemen before they all ended up elsewhere? So there's a few things on why I disagree with you respectfully about this. Number one, any of those guys you just mentioned, any one of them, you want to bring up Josh Naylor, you want to bring up Paul Goldschmidt, a guy I personally like, you want to bring up Cody Bellinger, Christian Walker, you name the guy. Do you honestly think, and let's start here. I know there are going to be some who disagree. That's fine, but let's start with this. Do you prefer any of those guys to Pete Alonso? So if you were making a list at the beginning of this offseason, which we did offseason previews on basically every position, and you kind of know where I stand. I preferred Pete. Pete Alonso to me was my first option to play first base. But for you, Dan, and for anyone else listening, were any of those other guys your first option? Did you look at Paul Goldschmidt at his age, coming off the year he was coming off of, and said, I prefer him over Pete? Now, I like Goldie, and I said he's my backup plan. It turned out that he couldn't be my backup plan because Goldie got scooped up by the Yankees, and obviously the Alonso situation continues to unfold as we're sitting here in February. But I will raise my hand and tell you that none of those guys, I can rank them and tell you who I'd have preferred, but none of those guys did I look at, whether it's their contract status, whether it's what I'd have to give up to get them, or really just the money. I didn't look at any of them as better options than Pete Alonso. Did you? Now, for everybody in the audience, if you are talking to your phone or talking to your car and saying, yes, I disagree, Evan, I preferred Cody Bellinger. Okay, fair criticism. If David Stearns' number one option at first base was Cody Bellinger, and he preferred Cody Bellinger over Pete Alonso because look at the contract you were inheriting. It's kind of sort of similar to the contract they're even offering Pete Alonso, and Cody's a lefty, and he gives you versatility because he can play the outfield as well, then they should have gone after Cody Bellinger. So if that was your preference, absolutely. If that's David Stearns' preference, then he damn screwed up. If he preferred Cody Bellinger over Pete Alonso, then absolutely back in December, when Cody ended up with the Yankees, he should have been out there trying to make that move. I didn't look at him as a preference. Now, did I look at Bellinger as a very solid backup option if things didn't work out with Pete? Absolutely. But if you agree with me that all of those guys you mentioned are all fine backup plans, better than any backup plan that's out there right now, because the backup plan out there right now is essentially Brett Baty, maybe Ronnie Mauricio, and then maybe adding a right-handed bat, then I understand that. Like, I prefer a lot of these backup plans. But why would you go get your backup plan before your priority? So if you agree with me that Pete Alonso is your priority, you had no other choice but to play the game, unless you wanted to just overpay to make sure you got him. The one thing you can't predict if you're David Stearns or if you're me or anyone else is how the market was going to unfold. Did you know that all those guys were going to be gone and Pete was just going to be standing there without a chair and there would be a stare down? And you probably also thought, well, if all those first basemen are gone, which means a lot of teams kind of came off the need of a first baseman, is that going to set us up better to get Pete Alonso for the price we want? So I disagree with you, Dan, not necessarily about the blindly saying in Stearns we trust. That's just a slogan. David's been here for a year. He's done a fine job, but there's a lot to do. I mean, he hasn't earned my blind support. I like him. I think he's done a good job. So forget the slogan. Let's look at the game plan. to me, Pete Alonso was still the priority and was still the best case scenario at playing first base. All of those other players were very solid backup plans. Why are you scooping up the backup plan before your priority? And you know what that proves, if at least you're with me on this, is that what Hoff has said and what my good friend Big Mac has said in the overnight, which is they don't want Pete Alonso. Well, then that's not true. Because if they didn't want Pete Alonso, they could have preempted this by bringing in one of those guys. The Atlanta Braves, I don't know, did I ever read that email from the Brave fan? I don't think I did. We get a lot of emails, and I try to copy and paste them onto this document, try to get to as many as we can. But there's a guy, he may be listening right now, who's a big Brave fan. He found the Rico Brogna, believe it or not, while living in Georgia, because he wanted to hear Met fans cry after the Braves took care of us in 2022. And the gentleman, I know he sounds kind of like a little bit of a jackass, but no, guy turned out to be a nice guy and said, I ended up listening and I enjoy hearing the Met perspective. And he actually wrote an email. I got to find it because it was really interesting where he was giving his perspective on the Freeman Olsen situation in Atlanta and how you could kind of compare it to what's going on here with the Mets. If the Mets wanted to move on from Pete Alonso with any of those guys I mentioned, they could have done it. The Braves did that on a legend. They went out and they traded for Matt Olson. And they did that before Freddie Freeman signed in L.A. They ended his tenure by going out and getting somebody else. So I do not think David Stearns screwed this up. I think David Stearns prefers Pete Alonso. He just prefers him at his price. And as we sit here today in the first week of February, I don't know how the stare down is going to end. I can't give you fake optimism. I can't do that. I just try to read the tea leaves as best as I can. And I also can't give you fake negativity. I mean, am I sitting here right now saying it's no chance it's going to happen? No, I think the longer this goes on and the longer the Mets haven't replaced Pete and the longer Pete hasn't signed anywhere else, the better chance there is that he could come back. Anyhow. Oh, hi, Hop. How you feeling there, buddy?
Terrible. But
yeah, before you start talking, I want to warn you about something.
Uh-oh.
Because I know this would drive me nuts. I would have to get on Sean Morash for this. You didn't show up at work today because you're sick. You let Sal say, I don't want Pete Alonso for God knows what reason. And now you're going to come on the Rico Brogna and talk about Alonso when you didn't show up to work today. So I'll ask again, how you feeling, Pete?
Terrible. Terrible. I just I got a text from Ryan about 5 minutes ago too. Like, hey, are you coming in tomorrow? I said no.
But you can get on the Rico and speak.
I can. Yes, I'm here for 2 seconds. I do have to defend a couple things here, and I appreciate the fact that you brought me and C-Mac in here and telling us that we're wrong. But let me explain something. If we're so wrong, why hasn't a deal gotten done? You're telling me right now that David Stearns is such a stickler that he can't move the line at all to find a happy medium between him and Pete Alonso. If it's always been about Pete Alonso, that they can't just find a happy place. Like, what does it take to get the deal done?
So my follow-up to you would be to the question Dan asked. Why did they not acquire Josh Naylor, Cody Bellinger, Paul Goldschmidt, or Christian Walker? They were all available. They all got moved, and the Mets ended up with none of them. If they preferred any of them over Pete, the way Atlanta basically ultimately preferred Matt Olson over Freddie Freeman, why didn't they get any of those guys if they wanted to move on from Pete Alonso? You tell me.
You're right. Well, okay, but here's the other thing, too, is David Stearns seems like he's got a type. I'm not sure what type that is, but he's got his view of who he wants on this team. He didn't really want to pay for Christian Walker. He doesn't find him as his guy. There's a possibility that Vlad Guerrero Jr. may be the guy they're going to look at next year. So for right now, maybe it's not about this year. It's about next year.
Okay.
And that's a problem because
No, I
he's going to play this year.
Yeah, I want to win this year. I agree with you. And the one thing I think most of us would agree on is that the Mets are not better off, even though maybe Brett Baty becomes a star and maybe Ronnie Mauricio, after missing an entire year, has a great year. Like, the Mets could still have success. No one's saying they can't, but they would have a better chance of success if Pete is back. I'm just merely asking because it's a great question, and Dan isn't the only person to ask it about letting all those other first basemen kind of come off the market. If they knew they were moving on from Pete, why wouldn't you go after those other guys? Unless your answer is they just preferred the Brett Baty, Ronnie Mauricio option. That was always their preference.
By the way, there's a little hidden message here on the little bottom screen, just for you.
The Brooklyn Nets are a horrible franchise. Evan needs to give up on them. They can't even tank right. Yeah, that's kind of true.
All right. Yeah.
I am watching, for those that are consuming the Rico, I have my Nets game on in the background, but I'm not talking about the Nets. I haven't brought them up. I haven't said anything.
You keep looking backwards. That's why I had to jump on.
Well, I'm not distracted. I've said everything I need to say.
I know.
Let's get to the next email. This is from JJ. JJ writes, Evan and Pete, how much of the Pete Alonso contract situation is tied into Brett Baty's trade value? If the Mets offered way more than any other team, would that tell other teams they don't trust Brett Baty playing every day, thus tanking his value in a trade? By telling other teams that they're comfortable with Baty at third and Vientos at first base, the Mets are able to keep Alonso's contract at a fair price and keep Baty's trade value at a decent level. Love the show. Appreciate the insight. I don't think that has anything to do with anything. I don't think teams are dumb enough to kind of value a player, in the case of Brett Baty, based on what the Mets think of him. Like, Brett Baty has put up great numbers at AAA, or very good numbers at AAA. He has struggled when been given the major league opportunity, but it's not enough to say he can't play at the major league level. I think he's added to his value by learning second base. I made a big deal of that last year when he was out over there working out at second base, thinking, wow, he's got another avenue to come up here. David Stearns has talked about him possibly playing the outfield and possibly playing first base. So forget about how that adds value to the Mets as being a versatile player. I think that'll add value to a team he's traded to. I'd be surprised if they trade him at this point. You know, even if Pete comes back, like, I think there's a way Baty can play, especially that second base aspect. You know, Jeff McNeil, I don't think is just guaranteed 600 plate appearances whatsoever, especially considering he's had back-to-back lousy seasons. I know he started to heat up last season, but honestly, since the batting title, what's he been? If Jeff McNeil's not hitting, I think there's opportunities for others to get ABs, and Brett Baty could actually be a guy who gets those at second base. I'll tell you another avenue where Brett Baty can get at-bats. Brandon Nimmo has reported to spring training, and it's great, and he's saying all the right things. And I saw an interview with him on the SNY YouTube page in which Nimmo said, I'm just trying to get healthy, and I'm trying to be ready for opening day, which already leads you to say, is he going to be ready for opening day? If Brandon Nimmo is not ready for opening day, if Brandon Nimmo is ready for opening day, but the Mets really want to take it easy with him, Jesse Winker is an absolute candidate to get a lot of playing time in left field, which could open up the left-handed DH slot to Brett Baty. Like, there are ways, even if Pete's back, for Brett Baty to play. And I've laid that out all offseason long. So I don't think that's dependent, or the holdup with Pete has anything to do with Brett Baty's value. All right, let's talk about other things. You ready? Met fans ready? There's other things besides Pete Alonso. How about Anthony? He wants to talk about an off-season deadline. And this is worthy of a discussion, especially as we sit here today, a week before spring training, and there are still prominent free agents out there on the market, including Pete Alonso and including Alex Bregman. Evan, baseball desperately needs a transaction deadline. The offseason just keeps dragging on with ebbs and flows of transactions. I don't understand who it benefits to let things drag on all winter and right into spring training. Surely executives would like to know earlier what their roster will be. Players would like more time to arrange personal affairs if moving cities, and MLB would benefit from a flurry of activity centered around a single deadline day. During the lockout in 21-22, the deadline for transactions was great. What was stopping MLB and players from collectively bargaining to make this change. On another note, I'd love to see an MLB version of Hard Knocks offseason so we can see how contract negotiations go behind closed doors, Anthony. Considering what happened with the Giants and Saquon, do we really want a Hard Knocks Mets edition? Do we want to, have Steve Cohen in David Stearns' office saying, boy, Pete Alonso in Toronto would really kill me, David. He can go anywhere else, but not Canada. And then he ends up in Toronto. I mean, I think that anytime we get access, it's kind of cool. So I'm certainly not against that idea. Let me address this transaction deadline thing because Anthony brings up a point that a lot of people feel that way. Especially as we sit here right now with the fact that the offseason isn't done. How do we do it in a way where it doesn't hurt either side? And I'm not saying that because I give a rat's ass about either side. I like to be pragmatic. I could sit here and just make something up and say, oh, isn't that cool? And Pete would say, yeah, that's great for us. But if the MLB Players Association would never accept it, we have literally wasted our time. If the MLB owners wouldn't accept it, we've wasted our time. So to answer this question, Anthony, we need to think of something that benefits everybody. We get how the fans hate the offseason because we all agree. We look at the NFL, we look at the NBA, we look at hockey, and it is quick. Like, you may still get trades. We saw the Karl Anthony Towns trade right before training camp, but we're not seeing a drag of free agents. Like, the big free agents sign within the first few days of all free agencies, and then there's the next level, the next level, the next level. But the main guys are gone right away. So I've thought about this. Like, how do you make it to where it works for everybody? So I'm going to give you my idea. Because again, it's not just about making me happy, you happy, or anyone downloading the Rico Brogna. It's how can we give it to the players and how can we give it to the owners? So who benefits first if there's a deadline? The answer is the owners benefit, not the players. Think about the Alonso situation. If all of a sudden the rules of the offseason were you have to sign by December 1st, that's it. Or if you want a $100 million contract, you've got to sign by December 1st. All owners would do and GMs would do is wait right to that deadline, make the players sweat. Now, look, certain guys are just going to get their money like Juan Soto, but other guys are going to have to sweat right up until that deadline. And that's not something Scott Boras wants. You see the way certain agents work. They take it all the way into February. Sometimes they take it into March because there is no deadline. So a deadline is something the players don't want. Okay, well, how do we make a deadline, not really a deadline, but incentivize the owners to sign players? So here's what I got for you. If you are an owner and you sign a player before December 1st, I'm picking that date. You want to make it January 1st, whatever. If you sign a player before December 1st, that player will not be subjugated to the luxury tax. That is a tax-free player. What that does is, if you are an agent, there's now more money flowing early in the offseason. So if you want to wait, that's your own problem. Like if you're Scott Boras and you waited past that deadline, understand your client is going to get taxed if a team in the luxury tax threshold or beyond it signs the player. So if you're Scott Boras, you're thinking to yourself, man, I better sign before December 1st because if I wait past December 1st and now my player is going to be subject to the tax, not a good thing. So I think that works for the players. It works for the owners in this regard. And I don't know how much money this would make them. You would make the offseason an event. If all of a sudden there's a deadline of December 1st, you can air this crap on MLB Network and it will be a thing. Like you will finally have your free agent frenzy. Now, the small market team is going to complain because they're going to say, oh, this just allows the big market team to spend more money because they get a tax-free player. That's the negative. But if you can get enough owners to approve it, or even if enough small market owners say, you know what, screw it, we're not buying those players anyway, let's at least benefit from the fact that, hey, there's going to be a frenzy. And the benefit for the small market team, I've thought this through, is that maybe they figure the big market team will not spend past that deadline, because why are they going to buy non-tax-free players when they already bought the tax-free players in early December or in November? Does that make sense? So that's the best I can come up with, Pete, because I think deadlines are not something anyone would approve. So you have to incentivize it. And that's my game plan, to incentivize it for everybody.
I think the first part is perfect. I think you nailed that. Because I'm trying to think of too, like, if you get past a certain date, what are you going to do? How are you going to punish the owners? What, everyone gets a 1-year deal, but the price is double. Like, what do you do? And you're not really benefiting the players, because the players probably aren't going to get that money. The money's going to go to taxes or whatever. But here's the other thing too, and this is the biggest problem that I think I have with the whole scenario, regardless, that the small market teams don't play this game anyway.
Right.
They sit around and dick around for the whole entire offseason. I mean, look at the Miami Marlins. Have they signed anybody? It doesn't make a difference. What are they waiting for? What are the Pirates waiting for? So we're really talking about 7 to 10 teams that are really investing in this. So I think it's got to, your idea with the luxury tax is great, but there's also got to be penalties for the bottom feeding teams too, that just sit there and do nothing.
Yeah, it's why when the CBA runs out in a couple of years, and that's going to be brutal. That is not going to be fun. I wonder, I'm already thinking ahead 2 years from now to those off-season Ricos when we're sitting in a lockout. And, we could still talk Mets and Met history, but we're probably going to be breaking down the freaking lockout and all the things that, the players should give up or the owners should give up. But one of the things they're going to fight about is a salary cap. And I don't think there'll ever be a salary cap in Major League Baseball. And I think as soon as the owners bring it up, you're like asking for a lockout. But a salary basement, which is basically what you're referring to, is needed. Like, I'd argue, and I understand we are fans of a big market team, so I am going to sound biased when I say this, but we need a salary basement more than we need a salary cap. I really believe that. Like, I get it that the Dodgers spend a lot and the Yankees spend a lot, and now we spend a lot, but it to me is worse when you've got teams like the Pittsburgh Pirates and like the Miami Marlins, and until this offseason, the Oakland A's, who don't spend anything. So a salary basement would certainly help that. But look, it's a point well taken by Anthony about the offseason. It's not good that it is February and you still have big free agents out there. And this is not abnormal. This happens every year, which is why, we did predictions on Evan and Tiki at the beginning of the offseason. And I always like to save it, and then we play it and see how accurate we were. And one of the predictions we made is, when will Pete Alonso sign? Just when will he sign? And I will tell you guys, if you didn't hear me say it then or don't listen to the show, my prediction was basically late February. I forget the exact date. I have it written down. But it was like February 25th. And I said that back in November. And the reason I said that was because we know Scott Boras. We knew the market for Pete was going to be crunchy. It wasn't going to be great. And this is the way it is. Think about when J.D. Martinez signed. He signed in March. And I'll ask you this question. And I don't know if Pete Alonso is the guy to do it, but I'm going to throw something out there that has not happened yet. I don't think it's happened yet. I gotta look it up. I certainly don't remember it happening. And that is a player saying, if you don't give me what I want, I'll go into the season unsigned. I don't give a shit. I'll go into the season unsigned. And I'll wait. I will wait until someone gets hurt or a team gets desperate. Let's take Pete Alonso as an example. Let's say Pete Alonso says to Scott Boras, you know what? Screw this. I'm not signing anywhere. And Pete works out, goes to the Boras camp. He's taking BP. He's playing. He's working out. April comes around. Let's say Brett Baty is 2 for his first 30. Let's say the Mets are struggling. Let's say they're getting no production from the Finlands. And Pete's out there. He's still taking BP. He's ready to go. He's working out. On April 20th, and obviously at this point, we're talking about a prorated contract. You're not getting the full contract. So Pete will lose money doing this. That's the risk. Did the Mets finally say, oh boy, geez, we better just give in. We better just give in. That's killing me. I can't even.
I mean,
I'm not saying anything.
You got to stop. Put it down. Yeah,
D'Angelo Russell, you are son of a bitch.
Here's the
But think about that.
had-
Does that make sense, Pete, for a guy to just hold out into the season?
Well, Michael Conforto did that, and guess what happened? He didn't get signed.
He was
Remember
hurt,
that?
though. He was hurt.
Oh, he was hurt. Then he
was
decided to
hurt.
have surgery. It took a whole thing, but it was a whole process because they were trying to figure out what is he, because the qualifying offer I think ends after the draft. Am I correct? Doesn't it go away?
Yeah.
And there was like a chance that maybe he would play, and then it just went into the hey, I'm going to take surgery now. I'm going to skip the season. But that was a long process for him. It's not comfortable. I do remember the last the cup. There was about 5-6 years ago. Remind me where there was a bunch of players that didn't get signed, and they basically made their own camp.
Yeah, but that's happened a lot. Like that happened during the lockout, obviously, because there was such, the time there wasn't a lot of time, and so guys,
Right.
it was taking a while to come off the board. I don't even mean late in spring training because again, we've seen it. We saw it with JD Martinez last year. I'm talking about taking it into a season. And Conforto was hurt, so he wasn't really a weapon. But if you're Pete Alonso or if you're Alex Bregman, what? And I don't think it makes sense for Bregman. It would probably make a little bit more sense for Pete. But if you do that, and a team gets off to a bad start or a team struggles, does that actually help you? I would not. I'm not saying it's going to happen with Alonso, but I wouldn't put that past the Scott Boras client, thinking, hey, my value will only be enhanced by waiting and making that team sweat. Imagine Sports Talk Radio if Pete Alonso was just standing there waiting for a job and Brett Baty is 2 for his first 37. Imagine that. Imagine what we'd be saying on the Rico Brogna. People would be going nuts. So it's an interesting idea. I don't know if it would ever happen, but you know what? I can never say never. Good job on the Nets. They know how to not tank. I give them a lot of credit.
What happened? What they do now?
They won. They beat the Rockets just like the Knicks did. They beat the Rockets twice in 4 days. The tank is dead.
I think there's somebody. By the way, this is a scenario that you brought up. I think there is a scenario that there's been a couple players. Maybe it hasn't gone deep into the regular season, but at least a week or two. No, I'm gonna look it up. I'll find it because that is now on my mind.
All right.
But there's one other thing too that I do want to get back to. You mentioned it early in the podcast, and I just wasn't able. I wasn't around. Sal went on a tirade yesterday or this morning, whenever you're listening to this, regarding why Pete and the Mets don't fit anymore. And I gotta be honest, I understand it and I respect it for it. I got more messages today about Sal talking craziness about why Pete doesn't fit for the Mets anymore. But honestly, Evan,
why doesn't Pete fit for the Mets anymore? I thought Sal wanted Pete back.
I think he does want him back. I think he does make sense for Pete Alonso to be on the Mets. But let me put it this way.
Go ahead.
It is now February, and this process has been going on, and it doesn't seem like there's any other team involved except for the Mets and Pete Alonso. And we keep on going back to meeting and not working. This is basically the breakup that's continuing to happen over and over and over, and we're just got to cut the cord. Tell me, if they eventually sign that deal, whether it's a 1, 2, 3 year deal with opt-outs, with all this other garbage attached to it, because it's not going to be a long-term contract. It may really just be a 1 year end of deal, whatever the case is. You're telling me at this point in time that all parties are going to be happy? I think both sides are so frustrated at each other, so pissed at each other, that there's no rehashing this. I really believe that.
I completely disagree with you because I think while at first there will be awkwardness, no question. At first, there would be the press conference where you gotta kind of try to be honest, but not too honest. I think after days go by and weeks go by and baseball starts to be played, I don't think it's a thing at all. I think it's a non-factor. And I know that we've got an emailer, Jimmy K, who writes the Rico a lot. He's brought this up for a while about there being hard feelings. Yeah, I think at first, I'm not denying it. Sure, right away, that press conference, but then it's baseball. That's not a good reason to not want him back, or not a good reason for him not to come back. I don't think it's a good reason for either side to break up. These two sides need each other. And if they do break up, it's one of those breakups that you look at and say, boy, you're both idiots. You're an idiot, Pete,
yeah,
and you're an idiot, Mets. So I completely disagree with that. I think that's completely overblown. I think after a few days and a few weeks, it'll be fine. And by the way, let's say it's not fine. Let's say it's a disaster. It's a short-term deal. So if you're the Mets, there's not that much risk attached to it. Obviously, if you're Pete, having another bad year just hurts your value even more. But no, I disagree.
I think that Pete doesn't want to take that risk anymore. I got to be honest with you.
And go where? And go somewhere else where you're going into a new locker room and a new stadium and a new situation where you don't have fans that are loyal to you because you've had success for them. Like, walk me through how Pete's better off somewhere else because I'm confused by that.
I think that Pete Alonso at this point in time knows he's not a long-term Met, which we've both discussed on numerous occasions, right? So, I mean, if you don't know, maybe they're part of this agreement that the Mets are offering to him is like, hey, it's a mutual option or a team option after the first year. Who knows what the option is going to be? And maybe their loopholes are after this year, we're going to cut your ass. And then all of a sudden, it's back to this whole process again. And at that point in time, maybe Pete doesn't want to deal with that because he already knows he's on the way out. So if you're not going to do right by the money and do right by the years in any capacity, I'll just look for other places. And you're right. Oh, well, what does it mean for the fan bases being somewhere different? He's going to be somewhere different anyway. So he's got to get used to it.
He needs a good year. Pete Alonso needs a successful year. He needs a good year statistically. I have not heard about the Reds being involved besides John Heyman throwing out a Hail Mary. I haven't heard about the Rockies being involved. And I only bring them up because, those would be good situations stadium-wise where, you sign with the Reds. Pete Alonso get 50 home runs and enhances value a little bit. If it is the Blue Jays and it is the Angels, if that's true, do you think Pete Alonso has a better chance to put up bigger numbers with Toronto, Anaheim, or the Mets?
You want me to say the Mets, but I just don't agree.
I'm not wanting you to say anything. I mean, you could say whatever you want. I'm going to say the Mets because I think that familiarity helps. I think going into a new locker room is certainly not easy. And I think this lineup has a chance to be really, really good. And we haven't gotten extensively into it because I don't want to touch the money until Pete Alonso's back, assuming he's ever back. I'd bat him second. I have floated that out a million times. We haven't fought about it yet because we can't fight about it till Pete Alonso's a Met. That's a rule. Don't send me emails about it either. Like, we'll do it when the time is right. So I think if you strip away all the other stuff, he has a better chance for success by staying with the Mets. And in the Mets case, they have a better chance at success by him staying. So the idea of hard feelings, like, look, contracts have hard feelings. I mean, you get over it. Like, you're not going to sign the guy because you think he's going to have hard feelings. That's a dumb reason not to sign him.
But Ev, let me tell you something, okay? And this is the one thing I will disagree with you 100% on. Pete Alonso seems to be this guy that doesn't work well under pressure. And I don't mean that in like big time spot in the wild card game, No, we saw.
What is that?
No.
How do you minimize that?
I'm not minimizing that at all. I'm not. I'm talking about pressure in a different way. Like this season, we all can agree on was not a typical Pete Alonso season.
100%.
And he opted to go and do the Aaron Judge.
I'll tell you something funny. I've never wavered on wanting Pete back. I've been tested because he did not have a great year last year. He did not have a clutch year last year. And game 3 of that wild card series, after we're all screaming and yelling, please, Pete, we need you, Pete. We need you, Pete. And he's dropping a pop-up. I'm in my head saying, I don't know how you can bring this guy back. He's clearly been affected by the pressure. Everything you just said about pressure, you'd be right about. Here's why I think, with all due respect, the point gets thrown out. How could you preach to me that he can't play well under pressure when he then proceeded to hit the most pressurized home run in the history of the franchise, back it up by doing it again in the division series, back it up again by hitting a huge home run against the Dodgers? Like, if anything, I would say the monkey, the elephant, the monkey, the piano was lifted off of his back.
Monkey on his back
against the Brewers. So telling me about pressure, well, he can't handle pressure. Did you ignore the playoffs? Like, it's the reverse Aaron Judge. It's the reverse Aaron Judge.
Hold on, but did you ignore the 162 prior? I mean, that's the.
No, I'm not. I'm saying you're right. It was tough to believe he could handle the pressure. I just said it. even to the third game of the division, the wild card series. But once he broke through like that, doesn't it tell you that maybe the guy can handle the pressure? He had a great postseason.
He needed to get into a groove. He did. We saw even.
So does that not negate the first few months to make you say, well, maybe he can handle the pressure, considering he responded with their season on the line?
I honestly think that's why he doesn't want a short-term contract again, because he doesn't want to go through it. I honestly think that you got to take the human element in there. I know Pete Alonso, we talk about his goofiness, we talk about his awkwardness, but he is deep down an actual human being, and there's a possibility that he doesn't want to have to put himself through it because he failed.
No, I get, look, he didn't have a great year. There's a reason why he was in this spot he's in contract-wise. I think it's almost not hypocritical, but it's weird to hear he definitively can't handle the pressure when he followed up with an incredible postseason. I almost think that those few weeks, not that they negate 7 months, but what they should do is negate the idea that he can't handle the pressure. Because I'm sure you, Pete Hoffman, has made the exact opposite argument about Aaron Judge. I'm sure at times you're like, oh, yeah, MVP, but what did he do in the playoffs? Right? I'm sure you've said that, right?
But I could also separate the two. I can also say great regular season player. He's one of the best of all time. He just can't do it in a big pressure spot. But again, I understand and respect how good he is. Pete Alonso, and I do think you're correct. I think it took him, and he believed it, and a lot of players believed it too on the Mets, that all he had to do was find that moment.
And he did.
And he did. It just sucks that it happened in the wild card game and not game 62 of the regular season.
Why does that suck? Would you rather have had him? Wait, hold on. Would you forget Pete? Obviously, Pete would have preferred hitting 50 home runs. Right. They made the playoffs despite Pete not having the greatest year in the world. And then in the postseason, he hit a home run that saved their season. He hit 2 home runs in the Phillies series. I mean, you'd rather have him hit a bunch of home runs in the middle of May? What are you, high?
No, that was episode 420, bro. I'm just saying, I think that he would have preferred that, and I would have preferred that I had a great season, so we wouldn't have to have this banter of, Pete Alonso sucks, we don't need him, this and that, the other thing.
I'll tell you why you're wrong about this. If Pete had a great year, had that great year, I think he's gone. I don't know if that would have impacted how much David Stearns was going to pay him. What it may have impacted was how much another team was going to pay him. So I think if he had that year you're describing, I think there's a greater chance he's not even in the conversation, and we've already moved on. As we sit here right now, when will Pete Alonso sign? I want to play that game that we play on Evan and Tiki. I'm going to play with you right now. Not will he be a Met? Not because you go back and forth on it like everyone does. Give me the date of when Pete Alonso signs somewhere.
When is Mardi Gras?
I don't know. Mardi Gras.
Yeah. I'm going to say Mardi Gras.
Whatever I don't even know when that is.
Hold on. Let's see. Look at the date. March 4th.
That's a good guess. That's a very reasonable guess.
That's what I did.
Pete and I are going to spring training. We're going to do some Ricos from spring training, and we will let you know more details when we get the details. March 8th and March 9th. How about he signs one of those 2 days? You like that one? While we're down there, while we're doing a live Rico at a bar potentially, we're going to get the news that Pete Alonso is signed. Well, either way, whenever Pete signs, give us a little bit of time, and we will do a Rico. I'm going to tell you this. I'm planning on going to the Nets game on Wednesday night. They're playing the Wizards. It's a really, really big game. Really big game. If Pete signs or there is any kind of big breaking news during Nets Wizards, Pete, be ready. We will do our first ever Rico Brogna live from Barclays Center. Be good to go.
I'm ready. You have your stuff ready? Are you going to be in the suite or are you going to be in your seats?
Nah, I'm in my seat. I'm a regular fan. And Met fans, just remember this. I was in Barclays Center when I got some very bad news about the New York Mets a few years ago. I was in Barclays Center on a Friday night watching Nets Raptors. Nets were up by like 32 when Jacob deGrom left us to sign with Texas. And Hoff will tell you, I was so mortified by it. I left the game early, which I never do. Drove home to do the Rico Brogna. So Being at Barclays Center is usually like a spark for some kind of Mets news. Let's just hope it's not the negative news, because we are a place, no matter what Pete just babbled on about for 10 minutes, we are a place where we want Pete Alonso back, right? You still want him back. I don't know after that discussion, though.
No, but I'm just defending Sal a little bit. Maybe I am high. I don't know. But I'm just defending Sal a little bit because I do understand his point and why.
What was Sal's point? What you were arguing was Sal's point? I thought that was your point.
No, I was agreeing with Sal a little bit that there's a broken relationship there, and I don't know if it's recoverable. I really don't think so. I do want – listen, I've been MVP for about 3 years now. That's the one guy I want. I want him to retire. Like freaking David Wright sitting here saying, I really hope that Pete Alonso can retire. Man, can he tell that to David Stearns and Steve Cohen? Because at this point in time, he's maybe got a year or two left.
Yeah, I understand. Well, let's hope he comes back, but I'm not sure. I really want him back because I've got so many different Ricos that we need to do over the next few days and weeks. For example, Are the Mets Better Rico Brogna. I don't want to do that podcast until we have an answer on Pete Alonso. Like, how are we really going to do that? So the Are the Mets Better from last year, Rico, we'll wait until we get a decision. This is going to be a fun one. You ready for this, Rico, that we're going to do in the next couple of days, next couple of weeks? We are going to predict the 2026 offseason. Okay? So as we sit here getting ready for the 2025 season, knowing the young players that may be given opportunities, knowing the contract status of key guys, we are going to predict our wants in the 26 offseason, what we're going to say, what we're going to want, who we're not going to want. You like that? That's going to be a fun one.
By the way, everybody, Evan is plotting for when the strike happens, the baseball stoppage happens. He's got all the Mets rewatches ready to go. So,
dude. That's a good point. That's a good point. Well, we appreciate you listening. If you watched or listened to us live, we were all together as the Brooklyn Nets pulled off an incredible victory against the Houston Rockets that I still can't wrap my head around. So thank you. Thank you for being a part of that. That was really a lot of fun. But we appreciate you listening, downloading the Rico, rate, review, subscribe, do all that kind of stuff. And of course, you can interact with us by emailing thericob@gmail.com, thericob@gmail.com. A podcast I am going to do with you. We are going to do with you in the next day or so. Kind of a generic one, a fun one. We have the clock now in baseball, the pitch clock. We have instant replay. What other changes would you want to Major League Baseball? Maybe it's nothing. What other changes would you want Rob Manfred to institute in Major League Baseball? I'm going to give you my changes. We'll hear some of your changes, and we'll do a big Rico Brogna talking about the future of the sport we all love. Thank you very much for listening, downloading, and subscribing to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.